So, museums have an important role to play by recording and making available the ICH of indigenous communities. But how do museums see them? Are they traditional cultural expressions? In other words, something we can simply use? Or do we respect these things as indigenous intellectual property? And there's a subtle difference there in terms of ownership. Okay? So is it simply a cultural expression, or is it a cultural property? So we need appropriate processes and protocols for collecting and maintaining indigenous intellectual property and practices. So I think above all, museums need to demonstrate respect, acknowledge the need for security and privacy, and to show understanding. And the final thing I'd like to do now is just share with you one very thoughtful approach to working with indigenous groups that was developed in China when they were planning this first eco-museum development. And work didn't even start until they'd developed a very carefully worded set of principles. So, I've shown you this place before. You've all seen this slide. This is Soga Eco-Museum in Guizhou in China. And you've seen my friend here previously. Okay? But before the group of Norwegian and Chinese museologists and local governments and national governments started working towards creation of this eco-museum, they thought, well, how are we going to work? What set of principles are we going to work to? Now, the nearest big town to Soga is called Luzi, and it is actually a coal mining town, which was really interesting to me when I went there, because I come from what used to be a coal mining community. And it was very interesting to go back and find out that this place actually, much of economy is still based on coal mining. But the discussions took place in this town, and hence their name. They're named after the place in which the discussions took place. So these are the key principles that they were working to. The people of the village are the true owners of their culture. They have the right to interpret and validate it for themselves. The meaning of culture and its values can be defined only by human perception and interpretation based on knowledge. Cultural competence must be enhanced. In other words, we need to think about how do we work with local people to improve their capacity to work towards preserving and transmitting and sustaining their own heritage. Public participation is essential to the eco-museum. Culture is a common and democratic asset and must be democratically managed. So everyone needs to have a voice. Where there is conflict between tourism and the preservation of culture, the latter must be given priority. The genuine heritage should not be sold out, but production of quality souvenirs based on traditional crafts should be encouraged. Long-term and holistic planning is of utmost importance. Short-term economic profits that destroy culture in the long term must be avoided. And I think this is the danger, actually. And I have seen in other parts of the world developments of the kind that we saw at Soga, which have been very, very short-lived. People jump on this idea of dealing with their own culture, using it as a commodity, and then it immediately changes and begins to change and be adopted by other people, and the original culture is lost. And the long term really is discarded. Cultural heritage protection must be integrated in the total environmental approach. Traditional techniques and materials are essential in this respect. So again, it's this question of holism and seeing the place as an entity and seeing these connections, if you like, between nature and culture. Visitors have a moral obligation to behave respectfully. They must be given a code of conduct. Now, I think this is a really interesting one because, when I first visited those eco-museums in China, I had no idea, as a Western man, how to behave. How should I greet people? Can I go and look inside their houses? Can I talk to people? I tend to be a tactile person, so I often touch people, and is that allowed? No one told me. And when we went to the village yesterday, and we straight away went into the museum and we started picking up objects and looking at things, and how did we know that was the right thing to do? And I think this is something actually which is quite interesting, and I've never actually seen a proper solution to. But certainly you would think that if you're being guided around a place like this, then maybe that should be something that is told to you immediately. Okay, when you come into this monastery, this is how to behave. Okay. There's no Bible for eco-museums. I think you all saw that. They will all be different according to specific cultures and situations of the society they represent. And I think, again, I showed you that in some of the slides, but just thinking of the range of people that we're currently working with, we're all working in very, very different situations and looking at different aspects of culture. So whatever solutions, whatever our final plans are at the end of the field school, how do they actually suit that local situation? Are we coming up with an appropriate solution for those particular places? Social development is a prerequisite for establishing eco-museums in living societies. The well-being of the inhabitants must be enhanced in ways that do not compromise traditional values. I think that's actually quite a difficult one. Because we want people's lives to be improved, we want them to respect and understand their culture. But change, I think, is inevitable, and I think this is one of the most difficult ones to actually deliver. So I think it's quite interesting, actually. Although these principles weren't really devised with the idea of intangible cultural heritage, they weren't specifically thinking about ICH. They do help us think about the kind of protocols and ways of working which might be necessary for us as museum curators or researchers to actually deal with communities and their ICH. So to conclude then, you've seen that we've talked about human rights, we've talked about cultural rights, we've talked about intellectual property rights, indigenous intellectual property rights. What do we take with us into the field? And remember my first slide showed a number of words that were ones which are used when we're dealing with rights issues. But I think one of those words is really important. So we need to respect, okay? So we need to respect the individuals that we meet, the individuals that we're working with. We also need to respect the communities themselves as a whole. We need to respect their culture. We need to respect their cultural properties. We need to respect their beliefs. And we need to respect their knowledge. Thank you.